So we're going to cover blueberries and just start off really basically, and then go through the background on them, some of the different types. We'll talk about soils and sites, establishing blueberries, cultivars, blueberry culture. So just starting with a little background here, the blueberries are in the heath family, the Ericaceae. They're a Vaccinium is the genus. They're native to North America, related to things in the heath family. They're an acid-loving plant. When you have blueberries, you are dealing with a bush, not a tree, so it's a multi-trunked plant. They do require winter chilling, so if you take our varieties from North Carolina and you take them further south, eventually you reach a point where they just won't grow, so they do have to have some cold weather in the winter. Insect pollination is key, and of course we've all seen blueberries. They're a small-seeded blue fruit, and the surface of the berry is covered with a waxy bloom. So if you take a blueberry, the next time you buy some in the store, and just rub it on your shirt sleeve, and you'll see the wax rubs right off, and it looks black underneath. So it's an interesting fruit, and the light blue color comes from that wax, and that's an indicator of fruit quality. So if they're mishandled, you wind up with dark blueberries. And just a few pictures of the stages. This is a deciduous woody perennial plant. So in the wintertime, you'll see bare stems with flower buds out on the tips of the twigs. So those big fat buds you see in winter are where the flowers will be. And then, of course, in springtime they bloom. Summertime you have the crop, and then fall of the year you get some nice fall color. So they're a nice plant in the landscape. But I want you to notice in the axils of those leaves on that fall picture, those flower buds have already formed before the leaves fall off. So that has implications for how you prune, and we'll get to that in the pruning session. There are a number of native Vaccinium species in North Carolina. In addition to highbush blueberry, there are some very interesting names: bearberry, deerberry, sparkleberry, creeping blueberry. So lots of native Vaccinium species. The sparkleberry that you see in the upper corner there, shiny black fruit, those berries hang there until December, January. So it's not a very edible fruit, but it is one that sticks around for a while. The creeping blueberry in the lower corner, that's in my backyard in Wilmington, and it's so low the lawnmower goes right over the top of it, and it's still flowers and fruits. So just a tremendous diversity in Vaccinium. You may someday get the question, blueberries or huckleberries? Blueberries, Vaccinium, have lots of small seeds. But if you find a huckleberry, cut it open. If you cut across the equator of the berry, cross-section, you'll find it hard to cut through because huckleberries have 10 big seeds inside. So you can see those large seeds on the huckleberry, and that's how you tell them apart. So some folks use the terms interchangeably, but they're actually two different genera. As far as the types of blueberries that are cultivated, you may hear folks talk about low bush. Those are wild managed areas in Maine and Canada. Half high you may never hear of, but you sometimes see them in catalogs. We don't grow them here. They're a really high chill type developed in Minnesota. What you'll hear about more in North Carolina is high bush, southern high bush, and rabbit eye blueberries. And those are the three types that we grow in North Carolina. For home gardeners, usually the rabbit eye blueberries are the type you want to grow. They're the easiest to grow, the most vigorous, and most widely soil adapted. Just a shot there of the low bush blueberry in Maine. So they are ankle high. The berries are right down on the ground, and they're harvested with rakes. That's the berry you see in those little metal tins that come with the muffin mix when you buy a muffin package. But if you look at blueberry production in North Carolina, there's home garden plantings, pick your own plantings all over the state. But there's also a big commercial industry mostly in Bladen and surrounding counties. So If you drive into that part of the state, down Highway 701, you'll see blueberries on either side of the road, just all down the highway, because of the type soils that are present there. The types we grow are high bush and southern high bush, which the high bush you see quite a bit in the mountains of North Carolina. Southern high bush I mostly see in the coastal plain. And these are both Vaccinium corymbosum. And then the blueberry that I see most often in the Piedmont is the rabbit eye blueberry. It's Vaccinium virgatum, ripens a little bit later than the high bush, and it's a more southern species. It's native to Florida and Alabama. And this blueberry grows quite well for us in the Piedmont of North Carolina, sometimes too well. I've seen some really huge plants. If you look at the blueberry harvest timing, this is one difference between the species. So the first 4 rows here are high bush and southern high bush, and they start ripening quite early in the season. So this is our main commercial crop in North Carolina, beginning with O'Neill and going through Legacy. So we'll start picking in mid-May, and Legacy wraps up towards the end of June. The blueberry that is most often grown in home gardens is the rabbit eye type. And rabbit eye cultivars start in the middle of June and go through mid to late August. So they've just wrapped up here recently. And some cultivar names: Premier, Columbus, Tiff Blue, Ira, Powder Blue. These are all grown commercially as well as in home gardens. If you go to the sites in Bladen County and that part of the state, you find they're sand-based soils with pretty high organic matter content. And the bushes are grown on beds. So here's the row middle, and then the bed is quite high, maybe 18 inches to 2 feet raised bed. And the reason for that is if you take a set of post hole diggers and you dig a hole in those fields, you'll hit water. So if you plant the field flat, you'd have areas where the bushes just drowned out. So they're on the raised beds to keep good root aeration, and this system works quite well on these soils. But these are not typical soils for most of North Carolina. I know most of you don't have that situation. So we'll talk about how you grow blueberries when you're not on a native blueberry soil like this. So anything that's not in that category, I'm calling an upland site. So it's a site where you can't go out and dig a hole and hit water. And on upland sites, I typically tell folks to mulch, because usually the organic matter content is too low and the soils are too fine textured. They're not as well aerated. So something like bark mulch can be added to produce this organic substrate to provide a lower pH substrate, and really importantly, to improve drainage. One of the biggest problems I see with blueberries is just lack of soil aeration, the lack of oxygen in the root zone. When you talk about soil amendments, it's important to distinguish between bark and wood chips. Pine bark, the outer part of the tree, of course, is dark in color and doesn't contain any of the white wood from the interior part of the tree. And that's what you would like to use to amend the soil, to mix in the soil before you plant, to add some organic substrate. And it's also a nice acid material. The pH runs in the mid-4s, and so it's a good thing to amend soil with to grow blueberries. Wood chips are quite different. That's the interior part of the tree. They are okay to use on the surface for a surface mulch to suppress weeds, but if you mix it in the soil, this material, as it breaks down, ties up all the nitrogen in the soil. So there's an important distinction there when you talk to folks about what to use to amend soil versus to mulch. Make sure you're distinguishing between the bark and the chips as material of choice. Wood chip material can be used once it decays. So once it starts breaking down and becoming soil-like, then you can amend soil with it. But while it's fresh, it's just going to tie up too much nitrogen. Are we okay on sound? I see a comment there that we're not loud enough. Charlotte, are we okay?
Yeah, it's good to me. I think there's a couple of different places to adjust sound, and there is the sound on your device, which will have its own control. And then there is a bar above video and talk up at the top of the screen that you can adjust those. You can move those over, and that might help make it a little louder for you. So I hear that my volume's good. I'm actually using a headset, which does help because it means the speaker's really close to my mouth. But Bill, I don't know if you could move a little closer to your computer. That might help. It might, it would just bring you closer to what's picking up your voice.
I'll move my talk slider over. Is that any better?
Oh yes, that's much louder.
Okay, very good. Very good. Thank you. All right, so on the mulch discussion, I do encourage folks to use a surface mulch with blueberries. So you really don't want grass growing right up to the plants. So any sort of organic material, bark, wood chips, pine needles, can be really useful for that surface mulch to hold moisture and suppress weeds. Also, black plastic material. You can see in this image. You can actually use black plastic, holes cut through it, and plant right through the plastic mulch material. And before I make this thing too complicated, it is just really not that difficult to grow blueberries if you do these few key things. This is a planting of blueberries. I think it's at the Sandhills Research Station, just in the landscape, and they've done everything right here with getting the blueberries established. You notice they're in a raised bed, and it's amended with pine bark and then surface mulched with pine bark. This is a rabbit eye blueberry. It's in fruit with the time this picture was taken. So they really are if you think about how you landscape and how you develop landscape beds, blueberries really fit well into that model. And if you follow those steps and don't plant them too deep, give them some mulch, they'll grow quite well in the landscape. So what are the basic steps for establishing a blueberry planting? You want to start with a well-drained site and in full sun. Try to avoid clay soils. If you're on a clay soil, amend it, bed it up, get as high as you can with the beds. Really encourage you to have a soil test and acidify the soil as needed. A lot of North Carolina soils do not need acidification. If they haven't been lined, the pH will be pretty close. So if you have your soil tested, you can adjust fertility levels ahead of time as well, at least the phosphorus and potassium. Item number 4 is really important. Do you want to purchase the correct species and cultivar for your soil type and location? So for most folks in North Carolina, that's going to be the rabbit eye species. And sometimes you'll see at sort of the big box home and garden stores blueberries that just should not be grown here. So just because it's in a local store doesn't mean it's the right one for here. Number 5, if needed, add acidifying organic matter. Almost always need the organic matter addition in North Carolina. You're going to mix and mound that amended row to form a raised bed or raised row before planting. Now, at this point, someone always asks about slope, and you can rely on slope for drainage rather than the raised beds. But what you'll find is any area in the field behind in the hills behind a terrace row or or swale down through the field where the side is a little bit concave, blueberries will have problems. They'll just stay too wet seasonally and struggle. So anytime there's a question, get them on a raised bed. You plant blueberries as a dormant bush, so that's usually February, March. And number 8 is hard to get folks to do, to prune them at time of planting. So I prune a blueberry bush really hard before I ever put it in the ground, and really fan the roots out so it's no longer in the shape of a pot when you put it in the ground. So you want to spread the roots out really well. At the time of planting, you want to make sure you're removing all the flower buds. Blueberries, the first year you plant them, if they have flower buds on them, they'll try to bloom and fruit. And if they have too many on them, they'll actually kill themselves before they get established. So they're very precocious, and you want to remove all the flower buds and not try to make fruit the first year. Usually irrigation is critical in that first year. Blueberries are pretty tough once they're established, but for establishment you just about have to have irrigation. We'll have a dry summer and just lose the plants. You want to maintain a weed and grass-free zone and apply that layer of mulch around the bushes. So just to recap that, some of the common mistakes that I see when establishing blueberries is poor site preparation, poor drainage, lack of irrigation, and the trick for pH is to have patience. That bullet point there, planting before adjusting pH. If the pH is high and you plant the blueberries, you'll see interveinal chlorosis, as shown in this picture. So yellowing between the veins means the pH wasn't right when the bushes were planted, or it's gotten elevated, and they'll really struggle. So you really don't want to be correcting the pH while the bushes are languishing in the field and not growing well. They'll set them back and make them really have a hard time establishing. Again, don't want to plant the wrong species, and the last mistake I have listed there is failure to prune hard enough, and we'll talk about that quite a bit. As far as types, for the southeastern coastal plain, the southern highbush cultivars are the primary type for those native blueberry soils. For the mountains above about 2,500 feet elevation, it's just too cold for rabbit eye blueberry or for southern highbush. So in the high mountains, I really strongly encourage folks to use the northern highbush blueberry, the highbush cultivars, as listed here. So some standards, Blue Crop, Jersey are really old cultivars that have been grown successfully in the North Carolina mountains for a long time. Lots of blueberry cultivars out there, so just because they're not on the list doesn't mean they're not good. These are just some suggestions. And for most of the state, rabbit eye cultivars are going to be the way to go from all across the state up until you get to about 2,500 feet of elevation. This is going to be the most common type to grow. Standard varieties, Premier, Tift Blue, Powder Blue, and then some newer ones there as well. The picture there is of Ira. Just a little about culture and management. You do have to have a pollinating insect visit each flower, or a berry will not form. So this is really critical for blueberries, and something we'll talk about a little bit more further on. For cross-pollination, you'd like to have more than one cultivar. We'll cover pruning a bit later. Irrigation, I've got some slides of that. The two type systems I see are either overhead or drip, and I'll show you some pictures of those. Fertilizer, we won't spend a lot of time talking about fertility, but I would encourage you to just base it on soil testing. The reason I say that is a soil test from the coastal plain and a native blueberry soil is usually really low in phosphorus, so we have to have a high phosphorus fertilizer. But the soil tests collected in other parts of the state, in Piedmont and foothills and mountains, very often the recommendations come back only needing nitrogen. So in those soils, very often phosphorus is sufficient, potassium sufficient, and nitrogen is the only need. So rather than give you a recommendation that might be wrong for your area, I just encourage you to do that soil test, base your fertilizer on that, and the soil test really gives you some good information about pH and about the humic matter in the soil as well. So really worthwhile to do that. As I mentioned, the blueberry flowers have to be visited by a pollinating insect. They're very dependent on insect pollination, and this is a really neat little insect that you may see in the springtime in blueberries. When blueberries are blooming, it's fairly early in the year, and there are not a lot of worker bumblebees around, if any. So the bumblebees you see in spring on blueberries are the great big overwintering queens. And the southeastern blueberry bee in size is quite a bit smaller than the bumblebees. So if you see something that looks like a bumblebee but it's tiny, you've got southeastern blueberry bees more than likely. And they're just a really neat little insect, very much keyed onto the blueberry. And we're really blessed with a lot of good native pollinators in North Carolina, and this is one of them. So just a really neat little insect to look for when your blueberries are blooming. If blueberries are not pollinated, they fall off. So in this picture, you can see some berries that were pollinated well that have set and they're starting to size up. So these green berries, but you also see the flowers that were not pollinated well, and they're turning red. They're not sizing up, and they'll fall off. So this happens 2 to 3 weeks after bloom. So there's always a little anxiety in the blueberry season. Bloom is over with, but you don't know which berries got set and which didn't. And you may get a call from someone saying, "Well, I had plenty of flowers and then all my berries fell off." It may be a pollination problem. We saw a lot of pollination problems this year in the commercial industry. Perhaps a third of the crop this year, out of millions of pounds, fell off because we had cool, wet, rainy, windy weather during bloom. Pollinating insects could not work the flowers as well as they normally do, so we saw a lot of this drop this year in North Carolina, and Georgia saw some of the same problems as well. I see a question there, what insect, honeybee or bumblebee, is responsible for most of the pollination? Really depends on what you have. If you've got a small, like a pick your own planting, very often those do not need honeybee hives brought in for pollination, because there are feral wild honeybee colonies. There are lots of native bees that move in and pollinate. So we have a lot of pollinating insects out there. What is the principal insect pollinating? Honeybees work really well if they're abundant, and if the weather's good, they pollinate quite well. What we have observed is that honeybees tend not to work as well in windy weather and cool weather. And when the weather is adverse like that, then very often it's the native pollinators that are taking over and carrying the weight as far as pollinating the blueberries. So you'll still see bumblebees, you'll still see some solitary bees out there that are good workers in bad weather. The irrigation systems in North Carolina tend to be one of two types. In the coastal plain, the large commercial fields tend to have overhead irrigation because it can be used for freeze protection. So the overhead systems take a lot of water. It's 60 to 70 gallons per minute per acre to overhead for freeze protection. So a lot of folks just don't have that much water. Very often, it just about has to come from ponds, from surface water, for overhead for freeze protection. So what I often see in the Piedmont folks who are are irrigating from a well is drip irrigation, just a drip line with drip emitters down the row, one or two per bush, or very often what you see in the picture there is a drip tape that's a rigid permanent tape and has emitters every 18 inches or so, so it just wets the whole row. And so usually if folks are irrigating off of a well, it's a drip system. For harvesting, and when you think about the expenses involved with hiring help, hand harvest is the largest annual expense, paying folks to pick the berries. So if you can get folks to pick their own, that's a really good business model. If you have the population, the folks around to do the harvesting, and or customers who will pick their own, that's a big expense that you don't have to bear. We pick blueberries in shallow buckets, so this is a 1 gallon bucket clipped onto my belt here in the picture, and much deeper than that you start crushing fruit. Also, like to tie the bucket to my belt or to a harness or a piece of rope so that you have both hands free for harvesting fruit. If you ever tried to hold a bucket in one hand and pick with the other, that's slow going. So tie that bucket off. And to maintain quality on blueberries, you really have to have this discussion with pickers and with you pickers about how to maintain the quality. And the trick here is to pick on a frequent interval and to pick all the ripe fruit at each harvest. Blueberries ripen over a period of 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the variety, and you need to go through every 3 to 7 days for high bush, every 7 to 10 days for rabbit eyes, and pick all the ripe fruit so that there's no overripe fruit the next time you pick. So really it can be difficult to get you pickers to do this, but really an important part of fruit quality. You do not want to handle blueberry fruit when it's wet, so don't pick it or handle it when fruit is wet. The reason for that is most of the decay, post-harvest decay in blueberries occurs at the stem scar where the berry is attached to the stem. And that scar is not exposed until you pick the berry. But once you pick it, you expose that scar. If there's moisture there, we know spores are always present in nature. So if you have the moisture, you have the berry with an exposed scar, and you have the pathogen, then you'll have fruit rots. And to delay that fruit rot and extend the shelf life, cool the berries as quickly as you can. So when we pick blueberries, we'll set the buckets in the shade as quickly as we can, move them to the shed and get some fans on them, and get some cool temperatures on the fruit into an air-conditioned building or refrigerated facility just as quickly as possible. All right, well that's our overview of blueberry production in general, and now I'd like to switch over to pruning and discuss all the benefits of pruning, show some images, and discuss what I do pruning in establishment and also with mature bushes. So we'll cover pruning for the rest of the talk. Lots of benefits to pruning, and it's just an essential thing for blueberries. We prune them every year, and you're managing the height of the bush, you're increasing berry size, you're doing lots of good things with pruning blueberries. And one of the most noticeable things with regular pruning is increasing the size of the berries. That's the first thing we notice on bushes that haven't been pruned well, is the berries get really small. And for a home garden or U-pick operation, it's really a delight to pick nice big berries and really a chore to pick really tiny ones. It's just hard to fill a bucket with tiny fruit. So really want to use pruning as a means to increase that berry size and fruit quality. Just a look at the fruiting twigs on the blueberry. Flower buds form on the terminal shoots, and they're forming while the leaves are still there. So by the time you get to winter and the leaves have all fallen off, you'll see what you see in this image here, the flower buds out on the tips of the shoot, those nice big fat buds there. All those are flower buds. And then the leaf buds are these sharp, smaller buds further down the stem. So this has implications for your pruning. Obviously, if you cut all that off, you're not going to have any fruit. So those are already present in the winter. You already have your crop potential for the coming year, and you want to prune to keep flower buds, but to prune selectively so you have the best ones. There's just another shot of the flower buds forming there in the axils of the leaves. You want to keep the bush healthy through the summer, because if the leaves fall off before these form, then they won't form. And you can look at the blueberry bush in the wintertime, and if it doesn't have flower buds, then you can already tell whether you're going to have fruit. The tools that I use for pruning blueberries are mostly the long-handled loppers. Also, the small hand pruners are useful, but most of the pruning gets done with big cuts with the loppers. We've tried several different types. This is at the research station in Castle Hayne, and this is a set of pneumatic loppers. So you see this long-handled tool here with the air hose. It goes back to a compressor. And so it's an air-powered lopper. It's very powerful, very fast, but you have to listen to that compressor all day. So that's the downside, and you also have to tow that rig through the field. So in this scenario, we have 4 people pruning at once. You see the 4 drop hoses. One is off the screen there. So a 4-man crew. The tractor eases through the field slowly and prunes. And look where Buddy, this is Buddy Daniels that works at the station. Look where he's pruning. That's right down at the ground. That's where most of the cuts get made for blueberry pruning. Something new that we're trying, have tried for a couple of years that work quite well. We've dropped the pneumatic pruner in favor of these. These are electric pruning shears. Zenport is the brand name, but there are others. Saw these demonstrated by Mike Parker on tree fruits and decided to try them on blueberries. What we found with the blues is that we had to buy the extension. So since we're making so many low cuts, that long handle with the trigger makes it easier to make cuts down low at the ground. But you carry the battery on your back, and these are quite powerful as well. A little bit slower to cut, but they'll cut through anything you can put that head around, and they last for 14 hours or so. So it'll prune longer than I want to. So the battery technology has really gotten quite good. When you're pruning young bushes, we'll talk about this in detail, but I wanted to show this slide because it demonstrates one of the principles. You see 2 different bush habits here. You've got a bush here that has multiple branches. They're all quite healthy. And then you have a bush next to it that is a really long, leggy plant, some not very thrifty looking growth out on the ends. And this is the scenario where you either prune when you plant them or you don't prune when you plant them. So this is a bush that was a mixed cultivar. You see the flag on it there. So we left it unpruned so we could go back and find that mixed bush. And the ones on either side of it were pruned at the time they were set out, quite hard, down to a few inches above the soil. So blueberries are not grafted; they're on their own roots, and you're after a multi-trunk plant. So that pruning cut, when you set it out, it starts to build the bush shape that you're after, and you get a much better establishment pruning when you first set them out, rather than waiting for this to grow a new bush from the ground, because that's where the new shoots are going to come from, is down here. So when I set out a new blueberry plant, I always take off the flower buds, either rub them off or cut them off. You see the cuts illustrated here. And that's just when the bush goes in the ground, the day it's planted. If you do that, you've basically told the plant that it's going to grow vegetatively. You've taken all the the flower buds off, so it's not going to make fruit and grows for 12 months. And by February of year 2, you'll have a lot of nice new growth, and again, it will have formed these flower buds out on the ends. So what we're going to do is take this bush and go to the next slide. So this is before pruning and after pruning in year 2. As before, you do prune every year, but it starts to be selective pruning. So you don't cut everything off, but you take out some of the outlying shoots, some of the crossover shoots, and you prune to an upright habit, perhaps leave a few flower buds to produce fruit that coming year. So there's your first crop, first few berries, but you're still growing the bush vegetatively. You do have to build a bush before you can have much of a crop. So this is February of year 2, and this is February of year 3 after it's grown for 12 months. You should be getting this sort of really exponential growth in the bushes if you're pruning them properly. And then finally, year 3, before and after pruning, you're holding more of the bush size, you're carrying more bush volume, but we're starting to do some things in year 3 that will be done for the life of the planting. And one of those things is keeping some of this one-year-old wood. So that red wood there is what illustrates something that grew in this current season. The brown represents 2-year-old, gray represents 3 years old. And so you're starting to get all different ages of canes emerging from the ground. And I always want to keep those different ages coming out of the ground. So as canes age out, I've got something younger that's in place to replace it. So that's the rotation over time of blueberry canes. And if you do this and make these cuts down low, in addition to some thinning cuts up here, you'll manage bush height, and you'll also maintain that necessary vigor to have the berry size you want. Just a photo here from a pruning demo that we did in Chatham County with Debbie Roos. This is a really nice rabbit eye blueberry planting. This bush has been pruned, and this one has not. So what you'd like to do is prune this bush to look like that. So the canes you would cut out are really obvious. You're just pruning for an upright habit. So anything that's out to the side, you would cut off. Anything that's too crowded, you cut out to open the center. So you want to make this unpruned one look like this. So pretty straightforward process. It's just hard to get folks to do that without some instruction and guidance there. That's the cuts you need to make. So don't be timid. Winter pruning of mature bushes. Again, we prune blueberries every year. So this is what you see in a good productive field that is going to have a nice crop in the coming years. Lots of red wood, and that red wood is where the flower buds are. That's last year's growth that formed flower buds. If you drive by a field and everything looks gray, you know the pruning hasn't been maintained. So the steps that I go through in pruning a mature bush, I start at the bottom. And so you want to narrow the base of the plant first. Take out the outlying canes, anything where the fruit is going to be too close to the ground. My next step is to remove the crossovers and the low angle canes. A crossover is just a branch that, just what it sounds like. It comes up through the bush and then sort of goes sideways. So it's crossing other canes. Take out those horizontal canes. Open the center of the bush, and then head back and thin. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means next. So there's the before and after schematic. You're just pruning to an upright bush, but notice that a lot of those cuts are big cuts down low, and that's what you want to do every year, is to take a few larger canes out and keep the bush rejuvenating from the ground. There's an actual photo. That's the same bush before and after. So you see what sort of pruning we're talking about. Just pruning to an upright habit, and you can see those white spots there. That's really big cuts that were made right down at the ground. What happens when you make a big cut like that is that immediately in the coming year produces a new shoot. So the replacement shoots are not going to emerge unless you make some cuts. I'd like to speak a little bit finally about stem age and berry size. This is where we talked about the berries getting too small for your U-pickers, and these two stems illustrate that. And these stems, these branches came off of the same bush on the same day, and one is just a year older than the other. So it really makes a big difference when you prune to remove the thin, twiggy growth that is going to result in small berries, as opposed to the healthier, younger shoots with the flower buds that will produce this size fruit. So there's a tremendous difference in berry size based on the age of the stem. So I found the best way to illustrate this was with some drawings. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at one blueberry stem over time. So each picture that you see here is the same stem. We're just looking at it again and again. So if you look at a blueberry branch in July, in August, it still has leaves on it and flower buds are forming out at the tips. In January, all the leaves have fallen off and there's your flower buds that formed. But further down you have leaf buds, the little sharp inconspicuous buds. So as the spring occurs, bloom occurs, you have berries form and ripen. The berries are out on the tip. But below them you have lateral shoots, leaf shoots that form, fruit out on the end. So you pick the berries, everything's great. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this shoot and we're going to look at it 6 months later in the wintertime. So same branch, the tip dies where the berries were, those lateral shoots go dormant and they form flower buds. And they have the subtending leaf buds below. So what happens in the second year is you get more berries, but they're a little bit smaller on this same stem that we were looking at last year. But you also get this same leaf shoot development below the fruit. So what we'll do is, this is still okay, but we're going to carry it 1 year further and see what happens then. By the third year, there's the initial shoot that fruited, the second year fruited, and by the third year, the twigs look like little matchsticks. They may have one bud out on the end, and the berries are really tiny. So that's the picture that we looked at the beginning of this the shoot discussion. The berry size just really falls off. So this is what you want to avoid. You want to avoid carrying the shoots that long into the third year. And to remove those, you have to remove them selectively because they're intermixed with those 2-year-old and 1-year-old shoots that are going to have larger berries. So just to recap, when a shoot's 1-year-old, that's the biggest berries it's going to have. When it's 2 years old, they're smaller, and by the third year, the berry size has really dropped off. So you'd like to prune selectively for this type wood, some of this type wood, but make sure you're getting out all of the brushy, twiggy wood that produces the small berries. And the way you do that is in the wintertime. And so you're looking for these nice large diameter shoots with large flower buds. The shorter the shoots get and the smaller they get, you can recognize that as having fruited multiple times and it's become this twiggy, unthrifty type wood. And the individual twigs look like little matchsticks. So when I'm pruning a blueberry bush in the wintertime, after I've made the big cuts, I look up into the upper part of the bush and either with pruning shears or with just with my gloved hands, cut out or break out wood that looks like this, so that I'm keeping this material that's going to have larger berries. So again, benefits of pruning, just managing bush height, berry size. You're preventing overcropping. These cultivars are all bred for production, so if you don't prune, they'll overcrop. They'll put themselves under stress. you're replacing older canes and extending the bush life, and you're keeping the bush height under management. So when you talk to folks and they say they have to get on a ladder to pick their blueberries, you know they're not pruning quite as much as they should. Really like to stay on the ground for blueberry picking. Think about the batter's box in baseball, from your knees up to your shoulders. That's about where I want to be picking blueberries rather than reaching up over my head. So the way you get there is by pruning and by making big cuts low down in the bush. And that's the end of the slides. I'd be glad to take questions. I'll take a look at the chat here.
Yeah, there's a really good question there from Johnny in Dare County about needing to move blueberry bushes. I need to move my blueberry plants to a new location. They have not been pruned this year. When to move and when to prune?
Oh, really good question. I would wait until winter if you can. You'd like to move them in the dormant season rather than now. When I move a blueberry bush, I cut the top off entirely and just move a root ball with some stubs sticking up out of the ground. So you don't want to keep the top. If you do have to move them right now, it's a difficult time of the year to move a woody perennial deciduous plant, as you all know. So not a good time in August to move the plant. If you have to, cut it all the way down and move just the root ball. What you'll get back is a few weak shoots this fall that may get cold injured this fall yet, but definitely don't want to keep the top of the bush, and ideally move it in the wintertime. Let's see, I see a question there. Do any varieties tolerate less than full sun? Excuse me. The blueberries in the wild are very often in the understory of the forest, so you rarely see them out in full sun in the wild. But the wild bushes tend to not produce a whole lot of berries because they're competing for sunlight. So they'll just about all tolerate less than full sun, but they will all struggle the more competition there is from shade. What you'll see with a blueberry field that's planted a little close to the woods is the bushes all start to lean away from the woods, so they're reaching for sunlight. So full sun if you've got it. If you can't, the sunniest spot that you can get. Okay, I see a question there. Altering ripening period. What does that mean? Good question. The berries that are produced on the thinner, twiggier wood, that wood is typically spring growth, and it forms the first flower buds. Growth that occurs later in the summer also forms flower buds, but they are buds that bloom later. So if, for instance, you prune selectively to remove that spring growth and leave the wood that grew later in the summer, you'll actually delay ripening. And that's actually a strategy for commercial growers in the coastal plain. One of the ways they prune is hedging off the bushes, and you can't do that in the rest of the state, but in the southeastern part of the state, they'll mow bushes right after harvest in late May, early June, and that will delay ripening on that bush for 3 or 4 days to a week the next season. Any varieties appropriate for container growing? There are some container varieties. Sunshine Blue is one that you'll see sometimes in nursery catalogs that does fairly well. Most of the blueberry varieties that we've talked about quickly outgrow a container. So you can produce any of them for a short while in a container, but by the time they're close to maturity, by the time they're 5 or 6 years old, it's really difficult to have a big enough plot to use them in a container. So look for the ones that are specific to container growing. Again, Sunshine Blue is one that comes to mind. look for ones that are specifically developed for containers. Question: if blueberries have been in the ground for 2 years and only have one stem, not pruned enough at planting, can they be severely pruned this winter to start over? You betcha. You can cut them off and just regrow from the ground there. So think of that single trunk blueberry just as a placeholder to get that has gotten the roots established, so it's done its job. Go ahead and cut it back severely this winter, and you won't have any fruit this coming year. You're cutting off all the flower buds, but you will start to develop that multi-trunk plant. Question: can you prune now, or is it better to wait until winter? I would wait until winter for sure, especially this late in the summer. Any pruning cuts you make right now will produce growth that doesn't have time to harden off before cold weather. So you'll see freeze damage on that growth, and it'll result in disease. So we'll definitely wait until wintertime. Also, once the leaves are off in the winter, you can just see what you're doing so much better. So I really encourage you to wait until the leaves have dropped. So it's usually December or January. The question from Pitt County, Extension Master Gardeners. If you haven't pruned years 1 to 3, how do you move forward with rejuvenation pruning? I would encourage you to look for the oldest wood in the bush. If it's vigorous, if it does have some new growth, leave that the younger wood and look for the old wood that's already starting to turn gray, and prune that out selectively. And that'll tend to be the crossovers, because the branches that have grown up and then had fruit on them and leaned over from the weight of the fruit, that's how crossovers occur in a blueberry bush. So look for that older, grayer wood, and be pretty aggressive pruning that out all the way down to the ground. So not just out on the tips, but big cuts down low. Okay, so we got another question there on containers. Let's see. Why do wood chips use up nitrogen and pine bark does not? It just has to do with the carbon ratio in the soil. The wood chips break down. It's a biological process over time, and in the course of decay, they tie up the nitrogen in the soil. The pine bark tends to persist pretty well and tends to not change a lot. When you dig up a blueberry bush planted in pine bark, it's a pretty benign substrate in terms of tying up nitrogen, because it doesn't have as much carbon in it to break down. So when you buy plants at the garden centers and nurseries, and you knock it out of the pot, look at that material that it's grown in. A lot of nursery media is mostly pine bark, and it's just a really good substrate for growing all sorts of plants as well as blueberries. So pine bark's just been a very useful product for blueberry soil amendment. Works quite well. If you can keep it wet, they'll grow in pure pine bark, but that becomes the challenge, is the bark just dries out too quickly if you use the straight stuff without mixing in any soil. There's a good question. Best frost protection for homeowners. You can do the sprinkler type frost protection in that situation, but using sprinklers for freeze protection requires you to keep them on throughout the freeze event. So there's sometimes a misperception that you just need to ice the bushes up and the ice is an insulator, but ice is a very poor insulator. The reason the freeze protection works is that the ice is being kept wet, constantly watered. So as long as the ice is kept wet, then the ice and the berries underneath them stay at the phase change temperature of 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and damage occurs at 28 degrees. But if you ice them up and then turn the water off, then the temperature goes much lower and damages the plant. For homeowners, at least for just a few bushes, I think covering them is probably the best But if you're going to cover blueberries for freeze protection, the cover needs to go all the way down to the ground and needs to be weighted down with bricks or something, so it's like being in a tent rather than just draping it over the bush. What you're trying to do is trap ground heat. And of course, when the freeze event is over, the next day, if you get hot weather, you're going to have that cover right back off to keep from damaging the plant with the heat.
So, Bill, I think we might have time for just one more question at this point, but I know you said you plan to hang around till the end, so you could take some more questions then. So there's a question about diseases, and I know there's some great fact sheets out there about diseases of blueberries, and I'll share those to everyone in a follow-up email. If you're on the North Carolina Master Gardener Volunteer email list, you'll get that, or your agent will get it and can share it with you. But to close up, I thought there's a good question from Andrea in Durham about cultivars. If more than one cultivar is recommended, is there advantage to planting more than 2 or 3 cultivars? Is more better?
That's a really good question. Blueberries will have slightly larger fruit, more seeds in the fruit if you plant more than one cultivar. Most varieties are partially self-infertile. So if you just have one bush, it's going to produce fruit. But to optimize production, you'd like to have, if you're going to plant 2 bushes or 3 bushes, then get at least 2 cultivars. I don't see a big advantage to having 10 cultivars, for instance. But having 2, there is some advantage to that in terms of berry size. But that does not mean that you can't plant just one bush. If you plant one bush, one variety, you'll still have fruit. So it's not a night and day difference. But there is some advantage to planting 2.
All right, thank you. That was excellent. We really appreciate you joining us today and sharing your expertise. More good news is Bill has given me permission to post his slides on NCSU Garden, so they'll be there for you to review all that great pruning information and other information in the slides. It'll be on NCSU Garden on the statewide site, which you get to after you log in by clicking on the button in the upper right corner that says statewide. And then you can go to advanced training where you find the plants, pests, and pathogens resources. So we appreciate as well, Bill, you letting us share that information with everybody that way. All right. So, and like I said, Bill's going to be staying with us, and so we will come back at the end and see if we have more questions. And I do also strongly recommend taking Bill up on the offer to host one of those blueberry pruning demonstrations. It is a truly wonderful way. The slides were great, but actually seeing Bill in action in the field, explaining what he's doing and what he's pruning, and then going home and doing that on your own bushes is, a wonderful learning experience, and how you'll really get a feel for pruning your blueberries correctly. All right. Again, I'm just having trouble getting my slide to advance. Well, we're going to move forward with current issues. There we go. Current issues with Matt Bertone and Mike Munster, and they're going to tell us about things that are going on in pests and diseases and plants around the state, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I don't know who's going to be up first, but take it away.
Well, when I accepted Matt's suggestion to go first, I should have thought twice, because it's very hard to follow you, Bill. But hopefully we'll have some things to keep your interest here, and it may even be helpful at the end of the day. I decided, since yesterday was the first day back to classes for a lot of our elementary, middle, and high school students in the state, that we would go back to school with the ABCs on PP and P, and we start out with A for arborvitae. Now, we've talked about different arborvitae problems in the past on this program, but one of the things that was new this year that had not been reported in North Carolina before showed up, I just want people to be aware of it, even though I would say it's not very likely that you'll find it, but at least to keep this in mind as you see folks with arborvitae problems. This particular was, excuse me, was a sample from a commercial nursery in Mitchell County in June of this year, and it actually was ruined a commercial block of arborvitaes, made them unsaleable. They said it started back in the fall of last year, but really exploded this spring. And the interesting thing to notice here is that you've got individual needles or groups of needles that are affected. You don't see the whole spray becoming yellow and then brown, wilting out, like you might from, let's say, a root problem or from a bagworm girdle lower down on the stem. But you see the adjacent needles sometimes very different, alive versus dead. And it turned out that this was something that's well known, let's say, in the Pacific Northwest, but even though it's been reported many years ago in Virginia, we hadn't seen in North Carolina before. And it's called cedar leaf blight, also known as arborvitae leaf blight or Keithia blight. That Keithia comes from an earlier name of the fungus, which is now called Demascella thugina. And if you look closely, so if you've got your hand lens with you or under your your dissecting scope, and you'll notice that again you've got the needles that appear to be very, one second here, get the right pointer going. So the contrast between a very green needle next to a very dead needle. And when I was picking at these, they were hollowed out, which made me first suspect an insect problem, which there is an arborvitae leaf miner that can do similar damage, but it doesn't leave these remnants of the fruiting bodies on the surface of the needle. So underneath that, this needle is probably hollow, for example. And you'll sometimes see it as just a kind of a flap, like a micro can opener had opened the epidermis there, and you could see kind of the fungal fruiting body protruding out from there. This is a fungus with an interesting life cycle. The infection would have actually occurred the year before, and then the symptoms show up this year. So it'll be interesting to see with all the rain that we had earlier in the season how much this is going to be a problem next year. From what I've read, you can get these needles then dropping off later in the season, so these plants may even look worse now than they did when they were first reported to the agent there. Well, and as I say, if you want to check for the difference between this and the arborvitae leaf miner, well, one thing is it would have a small opening probably at the very tip of the set of dead needles, and if you dig down far enough, you'll find frass, webbing, or an actual live caterpillar in there, depending on the season of the year. B is for boxwood, and of course for boxwood blight. We've talked about this a lot on this program, and I don't want to harp on it too much, but just a quick update. First, of course, the map showing the purple counties where boxwood blight was reported in, or we have diagnosed on homeowner samples in 2018 so far. And you will notice, it's not marked here, but the astute viewer will see that there are 4 counties that are new this year that had not had boxwood blight in previous years, at least not on home landscapes. I'm not sure about others, but they may be absolutely new counties. Watauga, which we talked about last time, but also Catawba, Rockingham, and Chowan counties out here in the northeastern part of the state were all new boxwood blight finds in home landscapes this year. The yellow counties are places where boxwood blight has previously been found, but has not been, at least through the clinic, diagnosed this year. And from this kind of scattered distribution and coming and disappearing, it really emphasizes the importance of transmission by transplants. So the way that boxwood blight will get into a landscape is when you bring in infected boxwoods into a landscape that already has them. So caution there is really important, and buying from producers who are operating under a boxwood blight compliance agreement to follow best practices to avoid having the disease in their nurseries. Just a reminder, if you do see any 2 of the 3 key symptoms, then you've probably got a home run on your diagnosis. So the dark leaf spots, maybe at the tip or may not be. The center can then turn a lighter color, but you also have the, of course, extreme defoliation starting lower on the plant and moving up, and the dark lesions on the green twigs of the boxwood. So any two of those three, and then you can be pretty sure you've got boxwood blight. We would like, of course, to confirm it here in the clinic, but those are, I've found over the years, pretty helpful sets of symptoms. All right, ABC. C is for Cercospora, Corynespora, and Cylindrosporium. It was very interesting that I looked at this hydrangea in my own yard and noticed these leaf spots on it, which turned out to be two. One of them is, of course, our very commonly seen Cercospora leaf spot, and the other turned out to be Corynespora. Does anybody want to venture a guess as to which was which? No takers. Okay. Well, the smaller ones that develop the white center, yep, Charlotte, that's right. The smaller ones with the white center are the Cercospora, and the larger ones, you can't see it too well, but a little bit in the one on the right, have a sort of target pattern to them, and that is Corynespora leaf spot. These are two different fungi. They cause leaf spots on hydrangea. I had, up until yesterday, only ever seen Corynespora on hydrangea in production settings, but there it was in my own yard. So these two do cause spots that are aesthetically unpleasant, but they're really not going to affect the health of that shrub, and homeowners shouldn't have to worry about any kind of chemical control. They can keep the infected leaves cleaned up when they come off, but the flowering for next year is probably not going to be affected anywhere near what it would be for something like, depending on the severity of the winter. And I just want to kind of underline Bill's point that he made earlier about pruning, that it goes for other shrubs as well, not just blueberries. You don't want to prune at a time of year when you'll stimulate growth that then can't harden off in time for the winter. Okay. And the third seed that I mentioned was Cylindrosporium. This was an oak tree, or a branch from an oak tree that was submitted by one of our landscapers from campus, but it came from Centennial Parkway, just near our Centennial campus. And I'm not sure which symptom he was concerned about, but it turned out it had two different problems, and they may be related. You've got the small spots, and then you've got the marginal burn or scorch on some of the leaves on one side of that twig. And as we've also talked about before in this program, the one with the marginal burn, that's bacterial leaf scorch. We didn't actually test this particular sample, but the symptoms are pretty classic, and also I know I had tested a tree from nearby there a couple of years ago and found that it was positive for Xylella fastidiosa. The small spots, and this is a first for me, they turned out to be Cylindrosporium, which when I looked at the literature, it doesn't seem to be very often that that's reported on oaks. And on northern red oak, it was difficult. They were trying to prove that it was a pathogen by inoculating plants and had a hard time doing it. So I'm suspecting that this is a leaf spot fungus that's taking advantage of the fact that the tree is stressed by the bacteria. Now, I don't have really an experiment to prove that, but it is common that with our other leaf spot, Tubachia, which is much more common on oaks, that you'll get that problem more on, and earlier I suppose, on plants that are under some kind of stress. So this was a post oak from September of, well, it's 9 years ago now, that has Tubachia leaf spot. And I just want to read to you what Chuck Hodges wrote when he did the diagnosis and report on this particular sample. He said, leaf spot and blotch caused by the fungus Tubachia dryina was the only disease identified on the leaves of post oak submitted. Earlier in the season, this disease would have appeared as small brown round spots scattered over the leaf. This time of year, the leaves are beginning to senesce, and the fungus grows beyond the original spots to cause large brown blotches. This process can also be hastened in hot, dry weather when the trees are under stress. And then he goes on to explain that it looks bad, but it's really not going to hurt the overall health of the tree. And as the leaves start to receive their last call notice from the tree, they will be declining in their physiological activity, and these fungi will start to take over more and more. So secondary leaf spot fungi this time of year on hardwood trees is not something that the homeowner should really be concerned too much about. Now, a quick question. Is this a mushroom? What do you think? While you're thinking about that, let me just mention or answer a couple questions here. Can bacterial leaf scorch attack more than oak? Yes, it can. Mostly we see it on pin oak, some of the other in the red oak group, but it also can occur on sycamore, where it causes quite a bit of problems. And I didn't include a picture of it, but we see it on very occasionally on redbuds. The host range is quite large, but those would be the tree species that I'd most be concerned about. We do sometimes see it on others. I remember we had it years ago on ash. There's another strain of it that gets on grape called Pierce's disease, which is very important. How do you sample for bacterial leaf scorch? We need a branch like that so that we have at least 10 or so petioles to grind up here and run that test on it, an ELISA test. All right. Mart, I'm not sure about ornamental shrubs as hosts of xylella. I'll have to check on that. All right, Gina and Wanda said that yes, this is a mushroom. And, well, yeah, sure you can call it a mushroom. I wanted to, again, following our ABCs, point out, though, that what looks and feels like a mushroom we can divide into two groups, and they conveniently start with an A and a B. So they're the agarics and the boletes. Now, I am definitely not an expert in the macro fungi like this, so I'm going to be flaunting my ignorance by just keeping it simple and mentioning that the two different groups are differentiated by whether or not they have gills or pores on the underside. So on the right is the underside of that little yellow mushroom that I showed in the first picture, and on the left is a mushroom. I believe this is Chlorophyllum molybdates. The gills are starting to turn green there. And you can see the difference in those two. What I really want to point out, though, the most important thing here is what is good and bad. Let's take the picture on the left. What's good and bad about that photograph for being able to make an identification if we were to refer it to one of our macrofungi experts? Okay, it looks like people have got the, there's the other one. Yes, we want to see the stem or stipe here. In this case, it has an annulus or a ring on it. That's very important and prominent. We want to see the gills, how those gills are attached to the stipe or not, and the density of them and so forth. But we don't see the top of the pileus or the cap, which we need to see. Also, we have it broken off here, and we don't see what structures we're at or just below the soil line. It's very important to include those as well. So kind of get in there and dig it up a little bit so that we can see those. And then, as you pointed out, the size is, we can kind of get a reference from the Bermuda grass in here, but it's good to always include a ruler, or if that's not available, a $100 bill or some other size reference that will be able to see how large the structures are. The other thing that's important to have is a note as to what setting it came from. In this case, it was in an open lawn. In the case on the right there, it was in a mixed hardwood, and I guess there were some pines in there too, forest. Some of these things, like with the boletes are mycorrhizal, so they're actually beneficial to the trees, and they sometimes are very specific to what tree species they associate with. So knowing where it came from in terms of what trees are around, or if it was out in an open field or an open lawn, is important in being able to do an identification. And of course, do save some of the material so that in case it can't be diagnosed from photographs by our experts, that you'll have some material to send in or send in at the same time. Let me just mention too that boletes, like the agarics, some of them are edible and some of them are poisonous. On the some of these previous photographs, the yellow one there was from a trip that little hike that I took with the family on Sunday in some woods near us, which are usually pretty poor in fungi, but we had so much rain, and it was just wonderful, the diversity of fungi that were out there. And this is a really neat little bolete that was fruiting in the forest there. Strobilomyces, I'm not sure which species it is, but it's got a wonderful common name, Old Man of the Woods. And you can kind of see the pore surface so that you know it's a bolete showing just under the edge of the cap there. So, to keep up with the ABC, A is for agarics, B is for boletes, C is for coral fungi, which are also basidiomycetes, so in the same group with the mushrooms, but quite a bit different. Without going into the identities of these, which I'm not entirely sure of, possibly a clavaria, possibly a ramularia, and the one in the middle, I'm not sure. But you may get some inquiries about these strange-looking structures coming up in people's yards, and these are the coral fungi. Jumping ahead in the alphabet just a little bit to S is for stinkhorns, and we did get an inquiry about this, from Gene Fox this month. A little on the dry side here, but notice how he did include the above ground portion, but also these structures that were kind of below ground. You can see the mycelium and the fungus even growing there through the mulch. And these are some species of the genus Mutinus, which we had a tremendous fruiting of here on campus. Oh, sorry, this is the egg stage there of the fungus before the horn itself develops out of it. And this is the fruiting we had right outside the clinic here next to Williams Hall. These were popping up over quite a long period of time. In fact, they're still out there. Probably Mutinus caninus. I'd be sure of that if I hadn't looked at the spores under the microscope, because they weren't quite the right size. But the other characteristics are right for Mutinus, or for that species, Mutinus caninus. You can tell the difference between Mutinus and Phallus by the fact that this gleba, or this sticky spore-producing area that attracts flies, that is just on the stipe itself, on that stalk in Mutinus, whereas in Phallus, the gleba is on a loosely attached cap that's separate from that stalk there. On the left here, a Phallus ravenellii that a homeowner sent in a couple of years ago, and said that you can smell them from 2 houses away. And then on that same trip in the woods, we found what my wife calls, it looked like a little squash flower that had wilted there, sitting on the forest floor. And this is another stinkhorn, not sure which one, but in the family Clathraceae. So S is for stinkhorn and T is for turkey tail, just a little point of interest, if not necessary importance. But out on a fallen beech tree there were several of these slash rotters, or wood decay fungi, that attack fallen trees and dead snags. These were 3 of them, and the question is, which one of these is turkey tail? While you're thinking about that, let me see. Mary Morgan, what should we recommend if homeowners want to remove large quantities of fungi? I'll have to get back to you on that one in 1 second. Maybe ask a little bit more on that, which kind of fungi you're talking about. So the one on the right, which is the one that has the greatest diversity of colors on it, so blues, grays, almost orange color, and that is in fact turkey tail. Here if we see 3 held on my son's hand, who was bragging about being a hand model, and it is in fact C, but you want to look underneath to be sure, and you notice that that one, it's kind of hard to make out, but that has very small pores versus something like Styrium up here that has no, well, a smooth spore-producing surface versus this one that has lamellae, at least, if not true gills. So yes, the one on the right is true turkey tail. Again, it's not that important a distinction because they're all just decaying wood that's either dead in the tree or dead on the ground. Okay, removing stinkhorns, for example. That is a really good question because the only thing you can do is try and dig it up in that egg stage and get ahead of them if the smell or the sight is too unpleasant. Since they do appear on mulch, there may be some things that you can do. If you look at our, let me send you the link to a blog that we did several years ago on nuisance fungi. And you can look at that for some more information about these and things like artillery fungus. But the idea that you're going to be able to go out and spray bleach or something to try and knock them down, that's just not going to work, or fungicides. So you can go out there and hand remove them, rake them, or dig them out. And there's some things you can do as far as when you put down your mulch, making sure that it doesn't dry out, for example, before it's being before it's put out in the landscape. To try and, it's interesting to try and keep the bacterial colonies going that compete with the fungi. So check out that particular blog post. Very quickly then, be on the lookout list. Phytophthora diseases never quite go away, so keep a lookout for those. We may still be seeing some root knot nematodes. Powdery mildew loves this time of year, so we're seeing a lot of that and starting to see the sexual fruiting bodies of it if you look closely. Rust diseases also, many of them enjoying this time of year to strut their stuff. And the secondary leaf spots we talked about, and also of course nutritional disorders as the gardens start to wind down on their fertilizer supply. And trees and shrubs, bacterial leaf scorch, which will be less and less evident as trees start to enter in their fall color. Entomosporium leaf spot on things like red-tip photinia and Indian hawthorn, boxwood blight, shot hole on different prunus species such as cherry laurel. Innonotus dryadius, this root and butt rot, you can see the big lump of one developing at the base of an oak tree here, and Cercospora leaf spot on hydrangea, which we mentioned earlier as well. The vegetables, tomatoes, septoria leaf spot, gray leaf spot, a late season leaf spot that we can get, and I may even have some bacterial leaf spots still. Bringing in your transplants of the crucifers, make sure and inspect those that they don't have any symptoms of black rot, any spots on the foliage that could be a bacterial disease that will cause you problems farther down the road. Likewise, make sure and inspect when it comes time your roots of the violas, pansies that you're putting in the landscape to make sure they don't have black root rot. A couple of rots on our apples to be aware of, and then the cosmetic problems of sooty blotch and fly speck. Pierce's disease of grape, pictured in the lower right there, caused by that Xylella fastidiosa. And large patch in warm season turf, leaf spot and Pythium blight on Bermuda grass, gray leaf spot on a couple of different kinds of turf, and as usual fairy rings, which can be on any turf at any time. So I want to, out of respect for Matt's time here, go right into our special feature presentation, interactive, critter or not. And again, the rules of this are that if you think that what we display on the screen is some kind of a critter, in other words, an insect or a mite, spider, mollusk, or a vertebrate animal, then you check your green check, and if you think that it's something else, maybe a disease, a fungus, some kind of abiotic problem, then you click the red X. and keep track of your score as we go along. I know that there are several of you out there who are participating as groups, so find somebody in the group to be the secretary and record the majority opinion as a check or an X. So I will turn it over to Matt, who will present question number 1.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Everybody hear me all right? Guess so. Okay. So we've got this thing on a pine stump in Avery County out in the west. Critter or not? Ooh, neck and neck. All right, I'll give everybody about 10 more seconds. Okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Mike, you want to tally it up? Let's see. So you should be able to, there's a check mark after the little hand under your name. There's a, okay, and plus we have 3 checks on the screen and 2 X's. So we're at 10 and 13, 10 not, 13 yes. All right, let's clear this and go to the next slide. All right, it's not. This actually caused some confusion in the clinic when I brought this photo back from the mountains. I thought at first it was a slime mold, and then my colleagues thought it might not be. It might be some eggs, which I thought it might be then. And then a friend of mine on Facebook who had photographed a similar thing that cued us into this likely species Enteridium lycoperdon, and actually this is a very early stage apparently of this slime mold, and as it gets older it becomes more opaque and more like a puffball. It starts to create spores within a kind of casing. So this might have been a very early stage of the slime mold. We are not completely sure that that's what it is, but we ruled out all other types of things. So that was a confusing one for us as well. And I'm pretty safe to say from looking at photos online that it probably is this slime mold. But I didn't collect it, so we'll never know for sure.
But one clue here that it's not some kind of egg nest, correct me if I'm wrong here, Matt, of, you know, not just an insect, but of some kind of maybe a snail or a frog or something you might wonder about, that these individual units aren't uniform. They have different shapes one from another. And of course, if we'd seen it over time, we would be
Yes,
sure.
yeah, you can see one here that's kind of L-shaped. Yeah, eggs would typically be very uniform. I mean, animals are not going to create different shaped eggs for any reason, really. So anyway, that was a very interesting one. Okay, Mike?
Here was a sample that came in on yarrow, and apart from the leaf spotting that was occurring here, it turned out that there were some very unusual something going on here on the leaves. When viewed at high magnification, they look like this. Critter or not. It looks like it's a runaway on this, and pretty much everyone has discovered that under their name, under the participants list, there's a little checkbox that if you click on it or hover over it, you'll see you can respond yes or no, and that way they're tallied up. If you just put them on the whiteboard, then we have to mathematically add them, and I don't know, Matt's good at that, but...
I'm an entomologist, not a mathematician.
Let's do this in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So we've got, oh, it's a runaway here. Even with the 3 additional yeses, that makes 26 plus 3 is 29. And 9, 10, 11, let's say no. So what do we say?
All right. Well, this appears to be, and I'm rearing it out, some type of hemipteran egg. You can see the caps on them. They've got this bean-like shape. Now, the ones, hemipterans that I've seen make similar type of eggs are flea hoppers, but these don't quite look like it. But these are inserted into the tissue, and I will keep you updated. Maybe in October, in the next couple weeks, so they'll come out. I'll tell you what they are in October. But they appear to be bug eggs from what I can see, but I don't recognize them. All right, let's clear this. Okay, so on American Beach, Wake County, critter or not?
Are we looking at the white fuzzy stuff on the branches or that bigger kind of yellowy tan colored glob closer up?
They may or may not be related.
Oh. A clue or maybe not.
I think we should just go ahead and reveal this one.
Yeah, this is a good one.
So give yourself a point, whatever you put.
Yes. Oops, sorry. So, yep. This is, well, Mike, go ahead.
No, I think you need to go first.
Okay. Well, the pretty obvious thing here on beach, which is somewhat common, are these white fluffy things. These are beach blight aphids. They are very common this time of year on beach branches. They don't cause harm to the tree, although they do produce sooty mold. You can see over here on this leaf there's some sooty mold. Dave Steppen said he so often finds big patches of sooty mold on the leaf litter below these branches. Because of these masses of aphids. Now, I did just notice, Mike, that there are some kind of bugs, some kind of insect it looks like almost on there, but I don't know from here. So, but what are they on?
Oh, wait, sorry, I'm just trying to get the drama going here. The yes, that large spongy mass there, believe it or not, is a type of sooty mold that's, it's just hard to believe, but that's somehow living off of the honeydew that's dripping from these aphids. And it was dripping pretty strong. It almost felt like a little misty rain standing under this thing. And it forms that branch sponge-like mass, and then it turns dark black as the spores are being produced, and can form this on the ground even where that sooty, or excuse me, where the honeydew is dripping. But what I was trying to do is, and this may or may not work, so we're just going to try it. I'm going to try sending to each of you a very small 3 megabyte movie file so you can see what these aphids look like when they're disturbed and what their reaction is. So if you're able to open the file that I'm just sending out now. Okay, loading 39. May not be as easy as I thought. All right, well, for the sake of time, we'll just go ahead and when you get that, you can go ahead and open it. So whose turn is it?
Okay, I think it's your turn.
So these are poplars from a research trial out in Allegheny County that had these deformations on the leaves. Critter or not?
Yeah, so again, under your name, you should have some icons with a smiley face, a little person with a timer, a hand, and then next to it should be a yes or no response.
Well, this one was too easy or too hard. It looks like wow, 5-1.
Ooh.
This one is not. This is Tephrina. I had never seen this. Well, Tephrina, of course, I've seen. It causes oak leaf blister. There's another species that causes peach leaf curl, but I'd never actually seen what it does to poplar. But there was a species, actually two species, but one here in the east that will cause leaf blister on populus.
Yeah, and notice I just noticed it's a little hard to see in this image, but these are convex right here, but underneath they are concave, and they're really. I took a look at it first just to make sure it wasn't an insect, and could not find anything in there. There was again, it was very flat. It's concave, but the surface was not widened or thickened. It's very similar to the Tephrina, I guess, on oak, except for a little bit more three-dimensional, it seems.
And I didn't even try looking for the fungus itself. It would have been long ago replaced by other secondary fungi. So, tally yourself up there, and I'm going to change that polling. What was your check and your X, I'm going to change that to A through E, so you can let us know how you did. All right. So for those who did put their scores in, looks like quite a few got 2 or 3 right. Nobody got them all right, but guess what? Neither did we when these things first came in. So I guess that's about what we want to see.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. If we had just seen photos of some of those things, we would not have made a diagnosis, I don't think.
Well, sorry, Matt, that you're only left with 14 minutes
right,
here.
Let's do it then. Okay. Well, another thing that did come in on the poplar was this petiole. It was green. I'd mistaken it for some other kind of natural plant material from the populace. But you cut it open, and there's a genus of aphids that creates galls on populace petioles. And you can see you cut it open. It's a lot of wax, a lot of members of the colony in there. And here's a separate image of all of them. You can see the foundress. I bet you can guess which one that is. It is this large female right here. She was the first one to create that gall and basically gave birth to just about everyone in that gall. And you can see the different life stages, the young ones growing older, and then some winged ones. And this is a member of the genus Pemphigus, which used to be its own family until they sunk it into aphids. But they are on poplar, and then they go to an herbaceous host in the summer afterward. So they're producing these winged forms that will go infest other plants. Okay, that was just a neat aside for that other sample. So today I'm going to talk about a bunch of bugs, actually, and a couple other things. But one of them, thanks to Steve Frank, our ornamentals entomologist, he visited a site that had some new azalea pests for me. One is this false pit scale, Lechinodiaspididae. It's a long family name. Lechinodiaspis prosopidis is the name of the species here. We only have one genus in the U.S. I actually added this family to Bug Guide. We'd never had any photos on Bug Guide of this family. It's not very common, but I'd like to make you all aware that this scale type exists, and there are other types of pit scales, the true pit scales, and they're called pit scales because when they feed, basically they depress, and the growth of the branches grows around them, and so they create this very pitted look. And if you'd seen the stick, it looks very warty and rough. This species is found on various woody dicots, but often in Fabaceae. Of course, this is not a Fabacean host. This is azalea. Don't confuse it for the felt scales. The felt scales on azalea, they're going to be white and cottony, not this brown papery. And so if we look, the younger ones actually kind of have this really kind of pretty wax pattern on them. They look almost star-like. And this is just before they're maturing to the mature females that are going to mate and reproduce. And you can see here the depression the scale is in. That's the pit that they're creating. Now they are univoltine, which means they're one generation a year. They will blow up and mature, mate. They'll have crawlers, and then the next spring they'll start to develop a little bit more until they mature and mate later on. And again, here's a close-up of the mature females. They develop this covering or test. These appear to be male pupae. I broke a couple open. There were some remnants of male scales, which are winged and fly-like. But the females are going to look like, the mature females are going to look like this brown papery kind of thing. Now another thing that Steve brought me on the azalea were azalea whiteflies. So this was a new one for me. I had not seen this species yet. Pileus azaleae. This is specific to rhododendron species, specifically azalea typically. The pupa is going to be vertical without any seedy around the edge. It actually has a very fine wax edge and some little tufts of wax near the spiracles and the kind of anal area. And basically, they are three-dimensional, small obviously, and very similar in biology to other whiteflies. So at this point, I'm going to take the time to talk to you a little bit about some more whiteflies. So recently I've been getting more and more photos of different types of whiteflies, so I figured I'd show you some of the pupae. So whiteflies are in Hemiptera, the true bugs, in the family Alirodidae. They're closely related to psyllids, aphids, and scale insects. Adults are, surprise, small white fly-like insects here. So that's where they get their name. The white is a dusting of wax on them. Adults are usually difficult to tell apart, although I'll show you one that you can identify typically. So you need this resting pupal stage for the best ID. So I'm going to show you some pupae and what they represent, what species they represent, and these are going to represent most of the common whiteflies that you're going to see around. Some are specific to certain hosts, while others feed on a variety of plant types. A few of these feed on hundreds of different hosts from dozens of different families, all different types. Then they do produce honeydew as young, so you often get sooty mold associated with these insects. And some do transmit diseases, but typically not in the home situation. So if you're concerned about disease transmission in whiteflies, it's not really going to be in that. It's usually an agricultural field crops kind of situation or some certain specialty agriculture in different areas of the world. So you can see the big difference between an adult and a pupal whitefly, and that's why we call them pupae in quotes. They are not an insect that has a true pupal stage, but they do have this strange resting form. Okay, so there is a genus Trialurodes. Sorry, the white is a little hard to see there. But basically, there are two main species that we often see out there. The greenhouse whitefly and the banded-winged whitefly. Now, the banded-winged whitefly is one of the few where the adults you can tell. They obviously have these black or darker stripes on their wings. Most of the other ones are uniform white. So that's why we call it the banded-winged whitefly. So Trialurodes albutylonius is the name. This one was on soybean, and they are on many, many, many hosts. Both of these are on hundreds of different hosts. Greenhouse whitefly is typically found in greenhouses in warmer areas, warmer regions, but you can find it out during the summer in North Carolina. Now both of these are kind of three-dimensional. They're raised off the leaf surface, and again, and I should mention that these pupae are going to be found almost exclusively on the undersides of leaves. So always check the undersides of leaves for insects when you're looking for pests. They do have a crown of seedy around the edge, and this is usually this kind of three-dimensional Barrel-shaped with seedy around the edge is usually a good sign of either you have trialurodes. Now, a couple of other types. These are both on variety of hosts. You've got Bemisia tabaci, which is probably going to be a few dozen different species. Right now we have races and different types, and they've been named all different things. And actually, in fact, there's a setose form shown here where they have seedy, and then on certain hosts that don't have trichomes, they actually don't have seedy. So that may make identification even more difficult. But these are typically more flat and almost heart-shaped, or they've got a little notch in the side and they're kind of pointed in the end. They are often called the silverleaf whitefly or the sweet potato whitefly, but they can be on many, many different hosts. Now, Dialurodes citri, the citrus whitefly, isn't just found on citrus, it's found on other hosts, but that's a very flattened, coin-shaped whitefly pupa. It's also going to have these yellow spiracular tubes on the sides and a yellow anal fissure kind of tube, and that makes a little Y. So if you see these pupae, that's what you're gonna be recognizing. Now, again, I should also note that these pupae, all these pupae, are only going to be about 1 millimeter or 2 long, so you're going to have to get a decent powered hand lens or a microscope to see these, but the general outline and the form should be visible fairly well, and they're all fairly distinct, I think. Now, really distinct genus are Tetralurodes. These are black and shiny. This one was on Nandina. It looks almost like the alien from the Aliens movies or some kind of Geiger creation. Really interesting looking, very, very distinct. And then you have often the same genus has this waxy outer ring on it. There is one Morai that is on mulberry, but it's also, these are on a lot of woody hosts, especially a lot of different trees. I don't know which one is on Nandina, and I could not find that on the host list for any whiteflies on some of the recent publications, so I'm going to try and figure it out, but it may be difficult. Lastly, a couple weird ones. So Alurochiton. Chiton is actually a type of mollusk that looks very similar to these. You can see it's almost like a birthday cake. It's raised up on these weird waxy sides, and it's got this striped appearance. This can be found mostly on maple here. And again, look on the underside of the leaves. And then you've got this Aluroplatus coronatus, coronatus meaning crowned. So you can tell this one has these crazy wax structures all over it. And that is found on oaks and some other woody plants. But it's not super common. We have gotten into the clinic. So anyway, those are whitefly pupae. I should note, if you want to make sure you have a whitefly pupa and not a scale insect, look for this little tongue-like thing in a little depression. That's called the vasiform orifice. You can see it on here. There's a little triangular one. You can see it right here on this Bemisia. And it's very nicely illustrated on this Albulonius right here. Basically, it's removed from the back end a little bit. It's often triangular. And this is actually how they flick honeydew out away from their body. Okay. So I'm not sure if anybody has any questions, or we'll just move on since we're close to 12. Okay. Now another type of bug that you're all probably familiar with are lace bugs, and I'm going to talk about a couple atypical ones that we've found recently. They're in the family Tingidae. Typically we see the genera Stephanitis or Corythuca. Corythuca is very diverse, lots of different types of hosts. Sycamores, asters have them, rosaceous hosts have a different one. They're typically host-specific, so the ones on asters are different from the ones on rosaceous hosts or on sycamores. Stephanitis includes the azalea lacebug and this one that's on Pieris, the Andromeda lacebug. You can see Corythuca are typically more lacy and have these large, what we call paranoda, these large expanded edges of the thorax with saw-like condition, where Stephanitis is much shorter and more glassy looking. but there are 165 species and 24 genera of lacebugs in the U.S. So I'm going to show you a couple ones that we got in and we've seen recently. One is this genus called Leptoipha. I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't really know. So one species I got in a while ago was Leptoipha costata, and this was on ash fraxinus. It's an ash lacebug. This species has this sharp edge around its wing all the way. But we recently got in a close relative on another olive family host. That's Leptoipha mutica on fringe tree. Now the client noticed that there were these stippling patterns on the fringe tree. This is actually very typical of bugs, including leaf hoppers, flea hoppers, things like that, where you get this star-shaped chlorosis, where they basically suck all the juices out of that area. And so they were seeing this, and if you turn over the leaf, you find this Leptoipha mutica on fringe tree. And you can see this one does not have the edge, the sharp edge to the side of it. It's also a little thinner, and actually they have very cute little nymphs here. I did not get any nymphal photos of the other species, but this one had a few nymphs on the plant. Again, on the undersides of the leaves, look for that these damage, these markings on the tops of the leaves for different lace bugs. Now, we also got a magnolia sample in for another insect that I described before, the tulip tree weevil. I described a month or two ago, and basically there was a lot of damage from that weevil. In the bag, though, searching for culprits and searching for that weevil, I found this thing. This was actually a huge lace bug. Most lace bugs are only a couple millimeters long. This was half a centimeter long. It was really interesting in that it wasn't as crazy looking as some of the typical lace bugs we see, so tried to figure it out, was having a lot of trouble. Emailed a colleague of mine, and he actually had redescribed it and is actually probably going to put in a different genus, but it is Melanoropala infuscata. He says he's going to move this and another very similar species out of this genus very soon. From their 2006 paper, they describe where it's found, and it's actually very rarely collected. This apparently is the third specimen ever collected in North Carolina, and there are probably fewer than 100 specimens ever collected of this. So it was really cool to find. And unlike other lace bugs, these apparently feed on the last year's branches of magnolia. And they don't feed on the leaves. You won't see the damage. This is how he hypothesized that they're so uncommonly collected, because people just don't find them on the branches and they don't see damage or anything like that. And actually, we had one specimen in our collection which matched, and we were able to figure it out independently as well. So these are some atypical lace bugs. Lace bugs don't just look like the azalea lace bugs or the other types of lace bugs. Okay, moving on fairly rapidly. So North Carolina has longhorn ticks now. Well, this is not what they look like. This, if you can't tell, is something I photoshopped. But this is actually what they do look like. So the Asian longhorn tick, Hemophysalis longicornis, there's recently been a lot of chatter about this. They found it in New Jersey for the first time a few years ago, and then in North Carolina, in Polk County, they did some surveying of ticks for a horse show and found a single specimen. Now this one was taken from Rutherford County, so right next door basically, and very recently. They're a fairly small tick, about 2 millimeters long, about the size of a deer tick, and much long Lone Star tick, typical one. Now, all of the ones that we have here in the U.S. are female. They reproduce without sexually reproducing, and so they can probably attain high numbers and spread pretty easily. So this is the top side of the tick. Here's the bottom side of the tick. You can see the teeth on the hypostome, which helps identify it. But really, the best way to identify this tick from all of our other ones is these features around the head region. So the palps, which are these leg-like processes right next to the mouth and in front of the first walking legs, have this point and this wide. They're very short and wide. The point comes out further than the head, and I'm going to call head in quotes because it's really called the basis capitulum. They also have these horns in the back of the head. And these features are going to let you know that they're Hemophysalis, and this species, we do have 2 species in this genus native to North America. One we know definitely is in North Carolina, but it's the rabbit tick, and you're very, very, very rarely going to see this. I've never seen a specimen of one. We're not sure about this tick here, how common it's going to get and prevalent across the state. The good news is, for now, they have not found any diseases in any of the ticks they've found throughout the U.S. of this species. So technically, it's the safest tick we have right now, but it's also the ones in the native range in Asia and Australia. Some of them are known to transmit a pretty serious virus to people. This tick, though, also is known now to be a majority livestock and animal feeder, but that can include household pets. So be aware. You probably are likely not to, as a human, get them, but just be aware that this thing is out there now. Okay, one more thing before we do bolo. Just a photo I took recently. Anybody know what this is? Let's see. Any guesses? Louse, bedbug, lots of bedbugs. Yes, it is a bedbug. This is a baby bedbug. This was only about 1 millimeter long. I won't tell you where it was collected, as there was some controversy, but you can see it's blood-filled. It has been fed, and it was just something kind of neat because it's basically translucent. It's this little tiny baby bedbug that has already had its first meal. So that's that. And lastly, just some bolo. So we've been seeing still some garden flea hopper damage that looks a lot like the lacebug damage on plants, especially cucurbits still. So we are seeing those around still. It's a good time to remove bagworm bags. Bagworm bags, yes. Bagworm bags. The females, they're probably pupating now, the males and females, or they're mated and laying eggs and getting ready to overwinter soon. So if they're tied off, cut them off with a razor and pull it off the branch. Fall blooming flowers attract insects, so goldenrod is attracting a lot of insects right now. A lot of these other types of plants that are flowering now will be attracting insects. And the univoltine arthropods, the things that only have one generation a year, you're going to start seeing more frequently now because they are at their largest size just about. So I'm seeing a lot of black and yellow garden spiders. They were there earlier in the year. They're just small. At this time of year, they're the largest they're going to get. You see a lot of caterpillars walking down the trees and getting near on the ground. They're looking for sites to pupate and overwinter. Mantises are big. Wasp nests are big. Wheel bugs and other assassin bugs are going to be the biggest they're going to get. And with that, I am done.
All right. Thank you, Matt and Mike. That was excellent, as always. I just have a couple announcements to share. I think the session will actually end at 12:15. The first thing, the most important thing I wanted to share is if you want to receive the follow-up email with links to many of the things that have been talked about, please be sure to subscribe to the North Carolina Master Gardener email list. The link is in the chat box, so you can click on it, and all you have to do is enter your email address. Also, want to make sure you know about the Western North Carolina Gardening Symposium coming up October 3rd. Their early bird registration is open, and the deadline is September 1st. It'll save you $5. If you register before September 1st, it is $60 for a wonderful day they've got planned out at Blue Ridge Community College in Flat Rock, North Carolina. And visit the Buncombe Master Gardener blog, buncombeMasterGardener.org. which is a wonderful resource for all gardeners in North Carolina, not just in the West, and an amazing job that the Master Gardeners in Buncombe County are doing with that blog. So visit it to learn what's going on and find out about how to register for the Western North Carolina Gardening Symposium. And with that, I wanted to see if Bill was with us, because there was a really great question, Bill, we didn't get to before, and someone had asked if they have already planted blueberry bushes and the pH is too high, what can they do?
Thanks, Charlotte, and I want to say thank you all for allowing me to participate in the session here. This has really been great. As far as adjusting pH after the blueberries are planted, you can treat the soil around the plants with elemental sulfur. So the way you would do that is just to apply sulfur. It can be the bagged sulfur that you get at the garden center. It's about a cup of sulfur for I think 100 row feet. So you're just sprinkling the sulfur down the edge of the planting, and typically when I do that, I'll apply sulfur at the edge of the mulch, where I've got mulch around the plants, or at the drip line of the plant. Sometimes just down one side of the plant. The thing to remember about adding sulfur is it's a slow process. It's a biological process for the sulfur to break down rather than a chemical process. So you're relying on bacteria to convert the sulfur to sulfuric acid. So it takes months for sulfur to have an effect. What I typically do is apply the sulfur and then go back 6 months to a year later and test pH again. You don't want to apply sulfur year after year because eventually you'll push the pH too low. But sulfur will help with the high pH on an existing blueberry planting.
All right, thank you. I'll just mention a couple of more announcements before we're logged out. We do have a webinar planned for September 27th, and there'll be an announcement going out about this soon to celebrate our 2018 Search for Excellence winners. So that'll be a great way to learn more about Search for Excellence, to get ideas for great projects you could have in your county, and to inspire you to hopefully apply for Search for Excellence next year. We will be holding it in conjunction with the Master Gardener College. There's also International Search for Excellence, that if you have a great project already going on in your county, you could submit this year. You have just a couple of days. They have a deadline of August 31st for that submission, and that can be submitted online. Contact me if you want more information about that. If you would like to support the North Carolina Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Endowment and purchase or renew your license tag, I would recommend, if you want one with the watering can, which you see here, I've mocked up what the new ones are going to look like with the new logo. There are still some with the watering can on it available. Until those run out, that's what you'll get. But we'll be switching over to the new logo as soon as they need to make more. But you can purchase those online, and $10 of that $20 renewal fee goes straight to the endowment. We also have new logo wear options. So if you're looking for some swag, with some Master Gardener branded swag, t-shirts, aprons, hats, visors, be sure to visit the Logo Wear website. If you've been before and didn't see things that jumped out at you, go back, because lots of things have been added in the last few weeks. And also to note, you can get anything on that site with your county logo, even though it's all shown with the state logo. So you can ask for that county logo to go up there with your county name. You can also ask for the watering can icon to be added. And you'll notice that a lot of the shirts and things that are available now are in the expanded palette color. So we're not just limited to the red, the red, black, white, and gray. We can have some shades of blues and greens and yellow. So that's exciting. You can also request special items you don't see on the site. The Roberts Group can pretty much get and make anything you can dream up. So contact Cody Williams at the Roberts Group if you want some special unique items that aren't currently on the site. All right, you've probably gotten some emails about our trips to Costa Rica and to New Zealand, which are now open for registration. Q&A sessions are posted on NCSU Garden. If you want to learn more about those, go to NCSU Garden statewide, and you will find a link where you can watch the recordings from those Q&A sessions. So in our very last minute, I just want to wish everyone happy gardening until we meet again. Our last Plants, Pests, and Pathogens for the 2018 season will be October 23rd, and we will have a representative from the North Carolina Climate Office to talk about how weather and climate affects the garden. And hopefully we won't see any hurricanes, which was the feature of their recent blog post, which is a great resource. If you enjoy weather, enjoy learning about weather, I encourage you to check out their blog. And thank you all. Thank you as well, of course, as always, to Bill, to Matt, to Mike, for the wonderful job they've done, and for everyone who has joined us today.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte.